On a humid Monday morning, Cassandra Reed, a name unfamiliar to most but feared by those who knew her reputation, was driving her black sedan into the heart of Millbrook, a town steeped in tradition and legacy. Cassandra was proud of her heritage, her accomplishments, and the strength she had found along the way, a strength shaped by years of hard work and perseverance in law enforcement. Unbeknownst to most in Millbrook, Cassandra was about to make history. She was their new precinct chief, the first black woman ever appointed to such a high rank in this deeply rooted community. Dressed in a crisp blouse and sleek blazer, she preferred a subtle entrance and decided to skip the police-issued vehicle, opting for her personal car instead. She didn't wear her badge or uniform. Today, she was just Cassandra, a black woman driving into a new town. As she crossed into Millbrook's inner city, she noticed the blue and red flash of police lights in her rearview mirror. She sighed, knowing all too well the probable reasons behind the sudden interest in her vehicle. Pulling over to the side of the road, Cassandra adjusted her rearview mirror, her gaze calm and steady. Two officers approached her car. A tall, slightly graying officer named Carl, and his younger partner, Officer Vince, whose face betrayed a mix of tension and authority. Cassandra rolled down her window and offered a polite smile. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice carrying the steady, controlled tone of someone used to dealing with the unexpected. Carl eyed her car suspiciously. "License and registration, ma'am," he replied tersely, ignoring her question. Cassandra calmly handed over her documents, watching their expressions as they glanced over her license. "Where are you headed?" Carl pressed, scrutinizing her with narrowed eyes. "To work," she replied simply, choosing not to reveal too much just yet. She was curious to see how this situation would unfold, aware of her own power yet sensitive to the biases still in play. Vince took a step closer, his face hardening. "Ma'am, we've been having issues with a lot of questionable drivers around here lately. Just need to make sure everything checks out." Cassandra raised an eyebrow, sensing the thinly veiled implications. "I see. Well, I appreciate you doing your job, officers. Safety is paramount." She kept her voice even, refusing to let frustration show. The officers stepped away, speaking in low tones by their squad car. She watched as they radioed in her license plate, perhaps expecting to uncover some secret or warning attached to her name. After a few tense minutes, Carl returned, his expression unchanged. "Step out of the car, ma'am," he ordered. Cassandra's eyes held his, a flicker of disbelief in her gaze. But she kept her composure, exhaling a steady breath before stepping out of the vehicle. The two officers positioned themselves on either side of her, their postures rigid, almost as if anticipating resistance. "What exactly is this about, officers?" Cassandra asked, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Vince shifted uncomfortably, but Carl remained unfazed. "Routine check," he replied curtly. "Need to ensure no one's carrying anything suspicious." The subtext was loud and clear. Cassandra felt the familiar pang, a reminder that, despite her rank and her achievements, there were still those who saw only the color of her skin and not the badge she'd spent her life honoring. She decided it was time to end this little game. "Officers," she began, her tone firm but still measured. "I'm Cassandra Reed, your new precinct chief." The air seemed to thicken. Carl's expression morphed from disbelief to alarm, his mouth opening and closing as he processed her words. Vince took a step back, his face a mask of embarrassment. Cassandra didn't gloat or scold. Instead, she let silence do the work, watching as the weight of their mistakes settled over them. "I was on my way to the station to begin my first day," she continued, "but it appears I've had an impromptu introduction to some of the officers I'll be working with." Carl stammered, his face turning a deep shade of red. I'm sorry, Chief Reed. We weren't informed." "That much is clear," Cassandra replied, still calm. "I trust that you both understand the importance of judging people by more than appearances. In this line of work, assumptions can be costly." Vince's gaze fell to the ground, while Carl straightened, attempting to recover his composure. "Of course, Chief. We apologize for the misunderstanding." Cassandra nodded, choosing her next words carefully. "I'll see you both at the precinct. We'll discuss this further." She returned to her car, leaving the two officers in a state of shaken silence. At the precinct, word of the incident spread like wildfire. Officers exchanged glances, some shocked, others amused at Carl and Vince's mistake. But Cassandra knew this wasn't a simple case of embarrassment. It was a teachable moment for her new team. That afternoon, she called a meeting with the entire precinct, a mix of veterans and rookies filling the briefing room. Her commanding presence silenced the chatter as she walked to the front, meeting each gaze with a steady confidence. "I know some of you may have heard about my encounter this morning," she began. "And while I could have easily ignored it, I believe it's an opportunity to address something important." She paused, letting her words sink in. "In this town, we're not just enforcing laws. We're setting an example. We don't have the luxury of assumptions. Prejudice, no matter how subtle, has no place in this precinct or in any community that values justice." The room was silent, a palpable tension hanging in the air. She continued, her voice unwavering. "Our role is to protect and serve, not to judge or discriminate. That responsibility starts with how we treat one another and the people we're sworn to protect." Carl and Vince sat near the back, their faces tight with remorse. Cassandra gave them a brief, meaningful glance before addressing the room again. "As your chief, I expect each of you to uphold the values of this department. If you're not prepared to do that, then you're free to find another line of work." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Cassandra felt a sense of resolve settle over her team. She dismissed the meeting, leaving her officers with plenty to think about. In the weeks that followed, Cassandra made her mark on Millbrook. She took the time to connect with community leaders, initiated bias training programs, and made it a priority to hold officers accountable for their actions. Her strength and commitment earned her the respect of both her colleagues and the citizens she served, gradually changing the culture of the precinct. One evening, Carl approached her after a long day. His usual stern demeanor softened as he spoke. "Chief Reed," he said, his voice hesitant. "I just wanted to apologize again for that day. It was wrong, and I'm ashamed of it." Cassandra looked at him, a hint of empathy in her gaze. "Carl, I appreciate that. But remember, change doesn't happen in a day. It's a process. The important thing is that you're willing to recognize it and make it right." He nodded, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. As he walked away, Cassandra felt a sense of satisfaction. Change was slow, but it was happening one officer, one moment at a time. And so, Cassandra Reed's legacy in Millbrook began, not just as a trailblazing black chief, but as a leader committed to transforming a system from within, ensuring that the values of justice and equality were more than just words on paper. As the weeks turned into months, Cassandra's influence permeated every corner of the precinct. She wasn't just setting policies. She was transforming attitudes, one officer at a time. Her presence commanded respect, but she didn't wield it to intimidate. Instead, she led by example, showing that strength and compassion could coexist. One crisp autumn morning, Cassandra was reviewing case files when she heard a knock on her office door. She looked up to see Vince, the younger officer from her first day, standing there with a nervous expression. "Chief Reed," he began, his voice softer than she remembered. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course, Vince. Come in." She gestured to the chair across from her, offering him a warm but inquisitive smile. He sat down, shifting uncomfortably. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to thank you for not reporting that day." He paused, looking down. "I've been carrying guilt about it since, and I know I need to do better. But I've also realized that I don't really know how." Cassandra listened intently, letting him finish before she responded. "Change isn't easy, Vince," she said gently, "especially when it means unlearning things that society has taught us, sometimes without us even realizing it. But the fact that you're here, willing to have this conversation, is a good start." He nodded, visibly relieved. "It's just, I grew up here. This town has always been a certain way, and I guess I just fell into it without questioning much. But working under you, I've started to see things differently." Cassandra leaned forward, her gaze empathetic yet firm. "Then use that awareness, Vince. Challenge your own biases, question your assumptions, and remember that every person you encounter has their own story. Being a good officer is about more than just enforcing laws. It's about understanding the community you're protecting." Vince left her office with a renewed sense of purpose, and Cassandra felt a glimmer of hope. Moments like these were what made the hard days worthwhile. She wasn't expecting to change every heart and mind overnight, but she could see the cracks forming in the walls that had held the precinct and the town back for so long. As her first year as chief approached, the town council invited Cassandra to speak at a community event. It was an annual gathering meant to celebrate the town's heritage and bring its residents together. Cassandra knew the weight of this invitation. She was the first black person to be asked to address the council, and she understood that her words would carry immense significance. The evening of the event, Cassandra arrived at the town hall in her full uniform, her badge polished and gleaming under the lights. As she stepped onto the stage, she could see a mix of faces, some supportive, some skeptical, and others curious. She took a steadying breath and began. "Thank you for inviting me here tonight," she started, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "It's an honor to serve this community, and I'd like to take a moment to share why I believe Millbrook has the potential to be a place we can all be proud of." She paused, scanning the crowd, her gaze softening as she continued. "I come from a long line of people who were taught to endure, to persevere, and to rise above. And while I've seen my share of hardship, I've also seen resilience, strength, and the power of community. That's what I want to bring to this town. A commitment to justice and equality for every person, no exceptions." Her words hung in the air, resonating with some while challenging others. She knew that not everyone would be willing to accept her vision, but she also knew that change often came from the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. After the event, she was approached by a diverse group of people, some offering words of encouragement, others quietly thanking her for her dedication. Among them was an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, a longtime resident of Millbrook and one of its few black citizens. Mrs. Jenkins took Cassandra's hands in hers, her eyes welling with tears. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you leading this town's police force," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Cassandra felt a surge of emotion, knowing that her role was more than just a job. It was a responsibility to people like Mrs. Jenkins who had endured generations of hardship and marginalization. Back at the precinct, Cassandra's influence continued to grow. She implemented training programs, fostered partnerships with local community organizations, and even organized youth outreach initiatives, determined to bridge the gap between the police and the people. Over time, she noticed a gradual shift in the department's morale and a renewed sense of purpose among her officers. But not everyone was on board with her vision. One of her most vocal critics was Officer Ray Thompson, a grizzled veteran with over 2 decades on the force. He was resistant to change, often making snide remarks about the new age of policing and how things used to be simpler in his day. One afternoon, Ray confronted Cassandra in the break room, his tone challenging. "Chief, with all due respect, this new approach may be good on paper, but it doesn't work in real life. Policing isn't about being nice. It's about keeping order." Cassandra met his gaze steadily, unflinching. "Ray, keeping order and respecting people's rights aren't mutually exclusive. We can uphold the law without compromising our integrity or the trust of our community." Ray scoffed, shaking his head. "With all due respect, Chief, you've got to toughen up if you're going to last in this job. This town isn't as open to change as you think." Cassandra felt a flash of frustration, but she held her composure. "Ray, I'm here because I believe this town can change. And if you're willing to work with me instead of against me, we can make that change happen together." Ray looked at her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But he didn't respond, turning and walking out of the room instead. Cassandra knew she might never win him over completely, but she was determined to give him a chance to come around. One night, a call came into the precinct about a possible domestic disturbance in one of the poorer neighborhoods. Cassandra responded alongside Vince and Carl, the 3 of them arriving at the scene to find a tense standoff between neighbors. As they worked to de-escalate the situation, Cassandra noticed Ray's squad car pull up. Ray approached her with a skeptical look. "Didn't think you'd be out here yourself, Chief," he muttered. Cassandra nodded, focusing on the people around her. "I believe in leading by example, Ray. And tonight we're here to help, not to judge." The situation eventually calmed down, with Cassandra and her team managing to mediate a peaceful resolution. As they walked back to their cars, Cassandra noticed Ray watching her, a hint of respect finally breaking through his usual disdain. In the weeks that followed, Ray's attitude slowly began to shift. He didn't openly acknowledge it, but his tone softened, and he started to show signs of understanding the value of Cassandra's approach. Little by little, he became less resistant, more open to the changes Cassandra was bringing to the precinct. Cassandra knew the journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, setbacks, and people unwilling to change. But she also knew that, with each small victory, she was laying the foundation for a better future. For her officers, her community, and for those like Mrs. Jenkins, who had waited a lifetime to see a leader who looked like her. And as Cassandra walked into the precinct every morning, she was reminded of why she was there: to build a legacy of justice, dignity, and resilience. One day, one step at a time. Over the next few years, Cassandra's impact on Millbrook became undeniable. Crime rates began to drop, not just because of increased enforcement, but due to the trust she had fostered between the community and the police. Programs that she had initiated, such as youth mentorships and community policing partnerships, had started to bear fruit. Neighbors, once wary of the police, now greeted officers on patrol, seeing them as part of the community rather than an intimidating force. One of the initiatives Cassandra was particularly proud of was a program for young people in troubled neighborhoods. She had partnered with local schools, setting up workshops and mentoring sessions led by police officers and community leaders alike. Vince, now a more seasoned and open-minded officer, volunteered for the program, sharing his own journey of self-reflection with the teens. He often recounted that initial traffic stop with Cassandra as a turning point, using it as a lesson about the power of humility and personal growth. Yet, while Cassandra celebrated these victories, there were still pockets of resistance. Officer Ray, though softened, still grumbled about the new ways Cassandra had brought in, and a few others remained skeptical of her influence. Some old-timers in the department felt that the town's tough image was being diluted, though Cassandra held firm, focusing on her long-term goals. One day, a call came in that shook the town to its core. A young black boy named Malik had been injured in a hit-and-run accident in one of the poorer neighborhoods. When officers arrived, they found him barely conscious, lying near the road as his mother frantically tried to comfort him. Cassandra herself rushed to the scene, knowing the gravity of the situation and the distrust that could easily resurface in the community if the case wasn't handled with care and diligence. Cassandra organized her team, ensuring that every resource available was dedicated to finding the driver responsible. The investigation stretched on for days, and tensions grew in the community, with residents rallying to demand justice for Malik. Cassandra made it a point to be visible, joining neighborhood meetings, speaking to local activists, and updating the community on the case's progress. Her dedication to the boy and his family was unwavering, and people took notice. Then, a breakthrough. One of her officers discovered footage from a nearby security camera that had caught the car involved in the hit and run. It was traced back to a young man from an affluent neighborhood on the other side of town, a stark contrast to the lives of many in Malik's community. Cassandra knew this would be a delicate situation, one that would require every ounce of her leadership to handle fairly. The case went public, and soon, media outlets descended on Millbrook, eager to paint the story as another tale of class and racial injustice. The town's divisions, once buried, began surfacing, with some residents defending the young driver, who claimed it was an accident, while others demanded severe consequences. As pressure mounted, Cassandra stood firm, calling for justice and due process while refusing to let the case devolve into a spectacle. When the case finally went to trial, Cassandra attended every day, often sitting beside Malik's family. She wanted them to feel supported and knew that her presence would signal her commitment to fairness and accountability. The trial revealed details that exposed the deep-seated prejudices within the town, a reality Cassandra was determined to confront head-on. Ultimately, the driver was found guilty of negligence, and the sentencing reflected the seriousness of his actions. The verdict sent a powerful message to the community. No one was above the law, and everyone deserved justice, regardless of their background or social standing. In the months following the trial, Cassandra's efforts to bridge divides in Millbrook gained even more support. She was invited to speak at regional conferences, sharing the story of the changes she had brought to her precinct and inspiring other departments to consider a more inclusive approach to policing. Her reputation grew, and with it, so did her influence, extending beyond Millbrook and sparking similar movements in nearby towns. One evening, as she walked through the neighborhood where Malik lived, she spotted a mural that had been painted on a wall. It was of a police badge and a dove, intertwined with the words, justice, respect, unity. It was a tribute not only to the work she had done but to the community's resilience and desire for peace. A young girl approached her as she admired the mural, holding her mother's hand. The girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you the chief?" she asked shyly. Cassandra knelt down, smiling. "Yes, I am. And who might you be?" "My name is Tasha," the girl replied, beaming. "Thank you for helping us. My brother says you're the nicest chief ever." Cassandra felt a lump in her throat, touched by the simplicity and sincerity of the girl's words. In moments like these, she knew that all the long nights, tough decisions, and personal sacrifices were worth it. She wasn't just a chief. She was part of this community, woven into its fabric in ways she hadn't anticipated when she first stepped into the role. As Cassandra stood, looking at the mural, she knew her journey was far from over. There would still be battles to fight, minds to change, and obstacles to overcome. But she was ready, more determined than ever to lead with integrity and compassion, one day at a time. Because in her heart, she knew that justice wasn't just a destination. It was a path she was carving for others to follow. As the years passed, Cassandra's impact on Millbrook became legendary. The once divided town transformed, evolving into a model of community trust and fair policing. Cassandra continued to build bridges, working tirelessly to ensure her precinct served as an example for others. News of her success spread, and soon other departments sought her guidance, eager to implement her policies and learn from her story. Millbrook's precinct was soon recognized as one of the most effective and progressive in the state. It wasn't long before Cassandra was approached by the state police, who offered her an opportunity to lead a statewide reform program aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities across the region. The offer was both an honor and a challenge, but she accepted, realizing that her work could have an even broader impact. Her departure from Millbrook was bittersweet. The townspeople gathered at a community center to celebrate her contributions. Former skeptics like Officer Ray and Vince, now her staunchest allies, praised her vision, strength, and commitment to justice. Malik's mother approached her during the farewell, with tears in her eyes, expressing her gratitude for everything Cassandra had done for the community. As Cassandra stood before the crowd, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come a long way from that fateful traffic stop, transforming not just her life but the lives of countless others. Her journey had been challenging, but she had left an indelible mark on Millbrook, a legacy of compassion, fairness, and unity. Before she left, she took one last walk through the town. Passing by the mural of the badge and the dove, she paused, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. She touched the wall, as if to leave a piece of herself behind, a silent promise to the people she had served. As Cassandra drove out of Millbrook, she looked in her rearview mirror, taking one last glance at the town she had called home. She knew she was moving on, but the lessons she'd learned and the lives she'd touched would remain with her forever. Her mission wasn't over. She was simply taking it to a larger stage, carrying with her the hope and strength of Millbrook, ready to make a difference wherever the road would lead. And as she looked forward to the journey ahead, she smiled, knowing that she'd always be a part of Millbrook, and it a part of her.